All right. Afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you guys for all getting together. It's a bright, sunny day out there. There's a lot of things you could be doing with your time. And a couple times a year, we like to get together with some of my friends and colleagues and help to demystify what we do, to lower the bar, to help you guys close the skills gap, the work ethic gap, the confidence gap that it takes to be on this side of the screen. And I want to show you today that everybody that you are, all your favorite influencers of education that are purveying freedom related information, they're just like you with a couple little things that they did for themselves along the way that made them a little bit different and puts them on this side of the production. So in lowering that bar, one of those things is to humanize everybody. We are not rock stars. We are not celebrities. Most of us did not choose to do this. We do it because we feel it's necessary in the world that we live in, unfortunately, that we have to spend so much time explaining the obvious to people who really have a low barrier of entry when it comes to evidence and things that they think to be true. So all the producers today focus on freedom related content to liberate your mind, to help you get more out of your life. And I'm going to be asking them some questions today. It's going to be just easy conversation. Nobody's on the spot. Nobody's under pressure. We're just going to, kind of have an interview session that demystifies and helps to disambiguate some of the things that need to be done to have a book in publication, a podcast, a video, a movie, a whole series, a conference with hundreds of people. All these sorts of things are within your skill set. And I think that we all have these dormant proclivities for self-reliance that have been covered up by the crud in our society. And these VIP, very independent producer sessions are where we come together and we kind of shake that off and we share some of the magic that we've discovered for ourselves. And when you understand that that magic is just knowledge, understanding, wisdom, and experience coming together on a regular basis for yourself and doing things consistently, it's a lot easier for you to do. Before we go too much further, I host a course twice a year. It's called Autonomy. It's a training course for adults. The website is getautonomy.info. And we have an early bird special. We're going to start teaching at the end of March. So just a couple weeks away. And so there's a special. So you can find out. And that's also available to anybody who's interested from today's events. But we got to get to why we're here. All right. So today's next speaker is a longtime friend. He's an author. He's a comedian. He is a mass debater. He likes to debate people on the public stage. He's on YouTube, live streaming all the time. And he's also an insightful wizard of various types of media. He brings his analysis to bear on many subjects. You can find him over at jaysanalysis.com. And he also might be the reason Tucker got fired from Fox. How you doing, man?
Hey, what's up, Richard? Glad to talk to you again. It's been a little while. It seems like we need to talk more often than we actually do.
Yeah, I agree. This recently I saw on YouTube the infamous video that was filmed back like last February. And it was all hush hush. And then it came out, eats the bugs. And then Tucker got fired. And then the video, I didn't see it for a while. And congratulations, because I think he's better since he's been liberated. So well done.
Yeah, I mean, I like to pretend that maybe I did have a role in that, but I'm not sure I actually did. I think it was actually a whole bunch of things kind of piled up. He had been saying, things that Fox didn't like for a long time. I think he was getting into ideas of theology is one of the stories going around that both, I think, Rupert Murdoch and Rupert Murdoch's wife didn't like, that he was talking about those things.
True.
The existence of real evil, spiritual stuff. So that was, I think, a catalyst. And then I think it's very possible that what we talked about in that documentary might have been kind of the last straw. So that's probably what happened, but it would be like a conglomeration of things that kind of led to that. But thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I'm glad that it came out the way that it did. We actually filmed a lot more stuff than made it into the 10-minute segment, but I guess beggars can't be choosers when it comes to media. So I'm happy with how it turned out. It was a blast.
But you guys had a lot of fun. you bring comedy and you bring light to a very like deep and, technological agenda type of topic that most people, they can't have a couple giggles and laughs and chuckles about, because it's like they're taking it too seriously.
Yeah.
And you help people to take a step back, and when they can laugh at something, they take their power back. And I think that's part of your gig, is you help people take their power back.
Thanks. Yeah, I think satire is one of the key weapons in our arsenal. I mean, things that are overtly ridiculous, if you take them really seriously, it empowers it. It gives it the presence, the appearance that this is a thing that has to be taken seriously. But I mean, we should all be laughing and making fun of Klaus. I mean, Klaus is an over-the-top, ridiculous character, and yet he is what he is. And so I just, when Scooter and I were talking around, batting around the ideas as to what we would do in that documentary segment. Scooter is the guy that was the producer at the time, good buddy of ours. Now, I was just suggesting these ideas that I didn't think he would take seriously. I thought, I was making a joke, and I said, what if I dressed up like Klaus and I had like a really crappy bald cap, not even a good bald cap. And, we were walking around and interviewing people. And I thought, he's like, oh yeah, that's funny. Well, no, he actually did that. Like, he bought the Klaus suit and the bald cap. And when I showed up in Austin to do it, he's like, are you ready to put your Klaus space outfit on? And I'm like, oh, you really literally bought this? I thought we were joking. So he thought it was, so in other words, yeah, I think we recognize that making fun of Klaus, which is obvious, is kind of easy to do. And it might even be getting into the territory of being hacky now. I don't know, but because there's so many Klaus impressions. But I mean, it's like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I mean, it's hacky, but it's like, this guy's ridiculous, right? I mean, his voice is ridiculous. His whole persona is ridiculous. He has to be mimicked. But anyway, long story short is, yeah, I agree with you that mockery, satire are a really important weapon in the arsenal. And I didn't really think that I didn't have enough confidence in that aspect of my persona, until over the years. You actually, encouraged that. I think I had a lot of conversation with Brett Venat about comedy and impressions, and he was very encouraging, and he himself does pretty good impressions. So adding those skill sets to your arsenal is absolutely one of those assets, right, that you can utilize to be successful.
Well, you downstreamed his argument, like eats the bugs and making fun of it, and whether or not it really got Tucker fired, it's at the bottom of my iceberg. Like, this is what happened, man. This is like the chronological timeline of events. And they can't have that over there on that side. But on the side of like doing voices and impressions, Brett was here when I texted you and said, hey, can you teach us how to do impressions? Like, teach us, like, give a course, teach us how to do impressions. You indicated it's like, that's not easy to do. And then I said, well, why don't you do a philosophy course? And then you started teaching philosophy. And then you gave a master class, bro. 12 weeks of beyond PhD level philosophy, because it's all coherent understanding. Like, it's non-contradictory. And I think that it's like philosophy unleashed, what you did. And that was just like, because we were texting back and forth, having fun, like making impressions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so like that, I wanted to use that as an example of like how these things that we create, sometimes it's like, it's just because we decided to like do something. And just like you made a joke, Tucker bought a costume, and next thing you know, eats the bugs is a thing, and getting him fired. So like, how do these things in your life sprout up, and when do you know to take the idea seriously and do something with it?
Yeah, I think I gave a talk to some guys in your sphere maybe a year ago, and they were asking a lot of that same question was being asked quite a bit. I think you have to play with it, right? You have to constantly kind of test the waters and see if that's something that the audience resonates with. So one good thing about what I do that makes that element easy is that live streaming is a really easy way to test a lot of that stuff. If you put a lot of time into production and editing and all of that, that's a good side of video stuff, video production that can produce good, unique material when you're making money from ads or something like that. But I got demonetized in 2018, the same time as Alex got banned everywhere. So for me, that forced me into a different model of doing the content. And the positive side of having to do basically all live streams where I relied on super chats was keeping that kind of fresh, ready to be on my feet, improv style. I've always liked improv. So I think hours and hours and hours of improv live stream allows me in a quick way to test out, whether doing a lot of impressions, integrating that into the podcast or the interviews to test out whether it works. And then being on Alex fourth hour, that allowed me to just sort of throw it out there, integrate it into a setting where it's a huge audience and pretty much seems to resonate well with people. So in other words, I just tested the waters, and I think that things like live streaming are a good way to do that. And you'll know over time whether what you're doing is good or not. Again, impressions are a weird skill set. It's not something everybody kind of has or can do. In my experience, it just seems to be kind of like random people are good at impressions. And some people are really good at one impression, right? Like I remember, I'm not saying Brett's only good at one impression, but I remember him he did a really good Bane, which I totally ripped off Bane from Brett. And then Brett does a really good, I think he does Al Pacino really good. So it's like some people are perfect at one impression, right? But then I don't know. Impressions are, again, I think it's just another additional thing that you can add. But in terms of live streaming, in terms of testing the waters, you just have to do it and not be worried about what people think. I'll put it this way. So when I was in high school, I wanted to be a stand-up. So I'd written a stand-up routine, and I had the biggest fear about actually doing the routine, not so much in front of people that I didn't know, but in front of people I knew, because they know me the best and they're going to be the harshest critics. Right. So we ended up doing some of this, me and some buddies, in front of the entire high school. And I was totally terrified to do it. But I decided in my head that I had to defeat my own mental self. So it's basically like you're arguing with yourself, right? You've got like the little devil on your shoulder that's like, your stuff sucks, dude. It's not funny. Nobody's going to laugh at it. And then you're like, well, but I think they will, because they did laugh in class when I did it, right? So basically it was like a challenge. And if you view it as a challenge and you want to like overcome things that you want to test yourself, that's what I'm trying to say. So constantly testing yourself to overcome your own fears and mental challenges. I think that's the best way to perceive this stuff. I was nervous even a few years or last year when we did our first live event, and I was going to integrate a whole comedy bit. And the first time I did it, we did it in Nashville. I was really nervous because I hadn't done anything like that probably in 15, 20 years. I think I did stand up. Last time I did stand up was like maybe 2010. So I thought I was going to bomb, super nervous, did it anyway. And everybody really liked it. So I just integrated about 30 impressions into a 15-minute thing. So I think you just have to convince yourself to do it anyway. And if you bomb, so what? Who cares? Nobody, it's not a big deal if you bomb, right? So the mental games and challenges that you set upon yourself to overcome those, I think that's the best way to approach it, and to test the waters by something like a live stream. If you're not used to live streaming, it's pretty easy. Actually, live streaming is the way the internet, YouTube, and everything works now. It's a lot easier to live stream than it is to actually produce a podcast. You know what I mean? Like producing a podcast is everybody sits in the room and you've got all these cameras, which is great. And then you have to produce it and edit it and all that. But it's a very arduous process. Live streaming, super easy. And it's an easy way to test out all the skill sets that you might want to experiment with.
Yeah, 10 years ago, I'd film a 5-hour deep end episode, and then I'd spend 40 hours cutting that footage together.
Exactly.
And I could do like one episode every 2 weeks and get it done. Today, it's all just like done. I remember when they stopped editing everything, and I was in the editing bay, like doing all this editing. I'm like, wait a minute, these guys they're just jump cutting. Like Philip DeFranco's just jump. What is this? What is going? And then, so a lot has changed in how it's like etiquette wise, what's acceptable internet content that holds people's attention. Because, years ago when I wasn't censored or throttled on YouTube, my average viewer time was like 47 minutes on a video. And then once they put algorithms in place, like 2017, 2018, and knocked us either off or, out of people's reach, then everything had to evolve. Right. So that's going on today. Let's go back even further, back to when you were like a listener of podcasts, an academic, a reader of books. You wrote your book, Esoteric Hollywood, And then at some point you started like podcasting and interviewing people and streaming. So like when people will hear this success from the last couple of years, these stories you were telling, they're thinking, yeah, but Jay was already known. He was already, everyone knew who he was when those things were going on. I want you to help them understand how like the person in the, on the other side of the screen gets to be on this side of the screen, and what types of things you had to like overcome within yourself, those negative self-talk, the doubts, those sort of things.
Yeah.
But like, what was like the turning point that helped to ignite your fire back then?
So partly it was what we just talked about with the idea of setting new challenges, right? So I remember listening to Alex in 2006 and 7. I had first heard of you around that same time. I didn't know you yet. I don't think we had interacted, but I listened to Alex and I'd heard things like, it was maybe 2008 or 9 when I first heard about your court case and that you were a whistleblower and all that. But I've been listening to Alex for a few years, and one day I thought, well, I'm going to call in because I really love this setup, this style of, interacting, debating the issues. I came out of college as a guy interested in debate, but nobody knew, what I was into or who I was or anything like that. I had only, written a few blog posts, and it wasn't anything I took very seriously. So I was just a book nerd. I wanted to be an academic, wanted to be in the public education system, wanted to teach philosophy, at the graduate level. And, listening to Alex, I thought, well, this, talk radio is pretty cool. So I one day decided I'm going to call in and I'm going to ask him some questions about some of the books I've been reading. And I just gotten a hold of the authorized biography of the Rockefellers, the Collier and Horowitz book. And I remember being absolutely terrified to call in. And I was working at my parents' liquor store at the time. And so on break, I called in and I'm sitting there waiting to get on with Alex. Never done anything like this. I had done stand-up a couple of times when I was younger, so I was not totally afraid of crowds.
Prank
but I hadn't done anything
like you. Everyone in the audience right now, you should know prank calls qualify you for such things. Go ahead.
Anyway, so like I had beads of sweat basically just dripping down my literal beads of sweat. I was so nervous to call in to talk to Alex, but I just made myself do it, right? And then Alex enjoyed the conversation. Alex ended up talking most of the conversation, but that's classic Alex, right? But the reason I say that it's not that it's that big of a deal to call into a talk radio show, but for me, I was nervous and I was kind of trying to talk myself out of doing it. So that was like the first step. And then Alex, I think, said something like, you should have a blog, you should have a website, you should be putting this out there. And then I thought, well, maybe I should. That was encouraging, right? Not too long after that, I started blogging, and then I came across your material. I heard about this book, Tragedy and Hope. I thought, well, I need to read that. I need to look into that. I remember looking at your court case, some of the interviews that you had done with people. I thought, well, this guy's cool. This is interesting. My buddy, who was a huge and is still a big fan of your material, actually said, you need to listen to the extended podcast that Richard puts up, and you need to check out Brett Minot and School Sucks podcast. So this was probably about 2010, 11, somewhere in there, maybe 12. And so I got deeper into y'all's material. I found it to be very encouraging as well. And at that time, again, I was just blogging. So a lot of people say, well, how did you get to this situation now? It wasn't, people don't understand the amount of work, time and effort that goes into what we do. Like, it's a lot of work. It's not something that you just do overnight. I mean, you see the books behind me, the books behind Richard, like we put a lot of time and effort into reading as well as doing the media stuff too. So it's kind of both things. And what began, I guess, as a passion of reading and blogging part-time for fun, more and more became something that I turned into I guess you call it a side hustle. Then it turns into a full-time profession, just to make this quicker, by getting up to the point where I'd written 100 articles or essays, and I did an interview with Sean Stone, and Chris from Trying Day reached out and Milligan said, hey, yeah, I enjoyed your Sean Stone interview. This is probably the third interview I'd done. I'd done a few podcast interviews with people that the quality was terrible and it came out awful. I think everybody who starts out doing this stuff, like your first few versions are going to be terrible. Live streams are going to be terrible. The quality is going to be, it's just part of the process of learning. You have to do it. And then so he said, do you have any manuscripts for a book? Which I didn't, but I was like, yeah, sure. So, but I had articles. And so I thought, well, the articles and the essays that I've written, not just on geopolitics, but really the film articles, film analysis, which was just what I was interested in at the time. That actually became the first book. And then that did well. The book became a calling card. So the book, it was kind of like a snowball process, right? Where the book became a calling card. The calling card then became a full season of a TV show that we shot at Gaia with Jay Weidner. Then that led to other things like people saying, hey, why don't you start debating? People used to do debates. And so that was just something that we did for fun one day. I didn't think that would turn into a whole other domain of things to do. Now, we've had all these big Muslim debates, atheist debates and so forth. So it's sort of like new arenas and doorways opened up from it's like a snowball getting big, like a cartoon, right? The snowball's getting bigger and bigger. And I think that the more that you commit yourself to this type of stuff, the more that you do it, you first treat it like a hobby. You put your part-time job level time into it, and then it starts to turn into its own thing. I went full-time doing this in 2015, I think 14, 15. And then it just, again, so it turns into a larger business. It turns into your own brand. It turns into new books, new live streams, new live events. We just started doing live events last year. I mean, that was a whole thing that Tripoli recommended doing. So I think what happens is it starts small and it gradually grows. New avenues, new doorways open up, and you just keep challenging yourself. And after you've been successful in multiple other previous challenges, you're more confident that I'm not afraid, to do impressions on the Alex Jones show, right? Like 10 years ago, I would have been terrified. I would never do, a Bill Gates impression or a Klaus Schwab impression on Alex Jones. I would have thought, oh, it's crazy. It'll be cringe. Well, now it's like, it comes secondhand. I don't care. Right. And if somebody doesn't like it, who cares? Right. So the next challenge, okay, last year we decided we're going to do live events. Well, I've never done a live event. So, now we got to learn about, getting venues, which is a whole nightmare. So like setting up venues is a nightmare. But what you learn is that people who like your work and like your material and your books and all that, they really want to also have a direct confrontation. Well, sometimes a confrontation, but a direct interaction with you, right? Sometimes we've had to have some security too, so there might be a confrontation as well. But yeah, people want to get to know you. They want to experience, your actual presence, hear you talk live, and so that's actually been a lot of fun. And then that led to being able to do that with people like Jamie Kennedy, Scream, Jamie Kennedy Experiment, Malibu's Most Wanted. So we're going to have another event coming up in March. If you're in the California area, come out to our Hollywood event. So I'm just saying, like, the avenues open up. You get to have, you get to go be on Timcast. You get to talk to Eddie Bravo. These things happen, Tucker, right, Alex, through the previous challenge that you set for yourself, and then just deciding I'm going to do it, right? Even if it fails, I'm going to do it. Failure, it's not a big deal if you fail. Everybody fails. And everybody who's had any success has had multiple failures to get to the level of success.
I know it's counterintuitive, but failure is required for success, at least in the beginning, until you figure out what's going on.
Right.
Now, one of my talents is taking big information sets and distilling them down. Yeah. So what I heard, to translate this for the audience, is Jay's lucky insofar as he was prepared when opportunity showed up. You guys are all out there doing stuff all the time. Are you trying to answer a question and pursuing that inquiry in an interesting way? Because if so, if you structure a little bit what you're doing, then when someone like Chris Milligan comes along and says, do you have a book? You don't have to say, yes, I have a whole book. You could say, I have a series of articles where I'm trying to answer this question. And he'd be like, great, right? But if you don't have that together and you're like, I've been watching random stuff on YouTube, wasting my time, not really doing anything, Chris is going to the next person who he thinks has opportunity and trying to lift them up. Yeah. And so it's about all of us learning to be prepared. So when those opportunities come up. Now, the other part I wanted to break open for the audience was, how easy would it have been for younger Jay to make an excuse why now's not the right time to write a book? Right? Or when Tripoli says that thing, how easy would it be to ignore Sam Tripoli's wisdom on such things? Right? So you have learned to manage your self-talk. It can still be there saying you're not good enough, or, there's no need for this or whatever. And you can do what you're going to do anyway. And I think that's part of where the audience can level up from those types of activities.
Yeah. Bertrand Russell, when I did yesterday's Alex, I was talking about that quote in Scientific Outlook, where he says that we're going to have to forbid literature in the technocratic dictatorship that gives young men the desire to be adventurous. He says, because we can't have a courageous, adventurous individuals in the technocratic dictatorship because they pose a threat. They might want to go against the technocratic dictatorship. They might question the system. And he literally says that. And he says, that's why we're going to forbid adventure novels and, adventure stories. And that's, I think, what's led to partly why they're calling for the banning of Lewis, Tolkien, and even people who supported their agenda like Huxley, Brave New World has to now be banned. So that suggests to me that what's good is to have that masculine, adventurous desire. So what I ended up doing was seeing all of these potential challenges and choices as adventures. I mean, I know that's kind of corny, but literally it is, right? So if I had, as Richard said, when Tripoli said last year, dude, do live, I could have said, well, I don't know about, that's a whole bunch of scheduling venues and shows. So if I had not done that, we wouldn't have gone to LA. We wouldn't have been on Jamie Kennedy's podcast. I wouldn't have gotten to meet one of my favorite comedians, spent the day with him, hung out. It was a highlight of just a personal experience of what I always wanted to do. Had I not decided I'm going to take the more adventurous route and experiment and see, and if it didn't work out, it would have been no big deal, right? If we did a live event and only 10 people showed up and we just had, a little book club meetup, that would have been fine too, right? It doesn't have to be, we sold, 130 tickets or whatever. It could be whatever, and it would still have been fun. It would still have been a challenge. I would have at least felt like, well, I tested it at least, even though I didn't succeed, I still tested it. I guess it's kind of common sense stuff. I think everybody knows, but we always, when we get in those actual situations, we listen to quite often and it's not even so much that we have, it's almost perhaps even laziness. Like we want to be lazy and be like, I'm not going to go to the trouble of trying to schedule an event and book a venue. And look, I had no idea how much of a hassle that was. Like booking venues is its own ridiculous job. It's a nightmare. I hate it, but it's so much fun to do the live events. Right. Live streams are fun, doing it. Alex Jones from Skype is fun, but there's nothing as fun as the live event where basically everybody's having a 5-hour party and we're studying, getting deep into the books within a live 5-hour event. And it's just, to me, that's the high point. But the same could be said for any of the topics that we discussed here. Chris could have said, well, if you don't have a manuscript or you can't put one together, then you're not going to have a book. I'm going to move on. And I could have said, I'm fine with just talking for 2 hours on a podcast. And that was before doing video. Right. So I wasn't doing video at the time. I could have just said, I'll just stay where I'm at. And so, but you need to have that adventurous spirit, cultivate that adventurous creative spirit that you have.
Did you also have a vision of yourself in the future? And you're like, yes, this thing that's being offered fits in with where I'm trying to go. Or how is it working for you?
I'll be honest with you. I'm enough of a self-critic that I almost always I can't believe when there is the success. So I'm serious. And when I see, if you had asked me a year before doing the book, do you think you'll have a book? I would be like, nah, that'll never happen. And I just feel like it almost felt like at the time, until you start having successes, I guess, and seeing positive things happen, you think of it like, oh, that'll never happen. Right. But then when you start doing the work, engaging in it, choosing to have that adventure, so to speak, then you start having successes, and then it becomes you're more confident. You're like, okay, no, actually I can be successful in this area. Oh, actually I can probably do this thing too. Right. So a lot of it is fear, right? It's not all pure talent, because I've known a lot of guys over the years who were really good artists, really funny, really smart, but they'd never chose to act on those skill sets or those talents. They just let them die. So that's another big part, like having the fortitude, having the desire, having the drive is a huge part of it. So I think that when I first came in contact with your materials, a lot of what Brett talked about, a lot of what Alex talked about back in the day, that I think initially instilled in me a drive that was lacking, because in my 20s, in the 2000s, I wouldn't have thought that any of this was possible. I wouldn't have believed it. I wouldn't have thought that I'd ever be hosting Alex Jones show. I never thought I'd be, on a Tucker event. None of that literally would have even seemed possible to me. So you have these small steps that you choose, and then that just snowballs into the big steps. That's what I'm trying to say. It's like, you can't do the shortcut either. There's no shortcuts. You're not going to bypass. I mean, if there are shortcut situations, they're one in a zillion. But for most of us, again, it might be cliche and cornball, but the 10,000 hour rule probably applies here too. You're going to have to put in the time if that's what you really want. And that will test whether you really want it. Right. So we're coming up on, I think 10 years of Jay's analysis. I think I started in either 20, maybe 13, so maybe 11. But so basically a decade of blogging to get to podcasting, to then get to video, to then get to, book Alex Tucker. So it took about 10 years to get.
I'm going to go back and find our first interview.
Yeah, it's still on YouTube. It's I think it was about 7 or 8.
Geez. All right. So the way I teach it to students is sometimes it's not appropriate to have goals, because if you have a goal to go like become famous, you're going to compromise your integrity along the way, probably to get to those goals. So in these cases of navigating our future and how do we take these steps and where are we going, I like to think of it like this. If I'm taking each and every step with well thought out integrity, then wherever I'm going to be in life is a good place to be. And I'm probably going to be surrounded by other people who are taking steps likewise. Otherwise, like you move away from those people pretty rapidly once you know the difference. This person does not care what they put between their ears, and they will spout anything that the talking points are saying. That's not safe for me and my family. That doesn't give us security in any way, shape, or form. So I like to be, intellectual self-defense, physical self-defense, and non-aggression is what is made, those are the ingredients for freedom. So if we can find the others and start having a lifestyle of liberty consistently, and then be able to focus on what we need to do as far as communicating to the public, everything becomes a lot easier when we're just dealing with signal and we're dismissing the noise as arbitrary and keeping it out of our lives.
Yeah. One of the big hindrances that I learned early on was that a lot of people would get in doing what we do. They get distracted with infighting, they get distracted with drama, they get distracted with, I'm going to expose this guy over there, that guy over there. And what I noticed was that the people who went down that route, almost within a year or two, would eventually destroy their own audience, right? Because when you infight and when you try to go after everybody who's not, it's purity spiraling where, you're not the real truther that I am. You're a compromised shill and I'm the true truther, right? That is an example of like where, you and I both have seen people in the past. We know individuals who went down that route and really just kind of squandered talents that they had. They had legitimate talents. They had legitimate abilities. And what happens is that a lot of people get into doing this, and maybe let's say you've been doing it for 2 or 3 years, and you're not at the success level that you think you should be at. And maybe that's a valid point. Maybe you're being throttled, maybe you're being censored. But then what happens is a lot of times those people will get angry or envious of people who have been more successful. And then their job is, they think, to take that person down. And if I take them down, then I'll get more popular or something like that.
Instead of just working harder, right? Because that would be my answer. Maybe you just haven't worked your hardest yet. Maybe, there's a level that's there to be crossed. There's a threshold. And that's how I think of it for myself. I just keep pushing forward. I don't compare myself to other people. I compare myself to myself yesterday, my yester self.
Yeah, I think there's a real danger in trying to set your goals based on how you compare to somebody else. So I think that's a really good point, to try to avoid distractions and drama and going after fighting with people all the time that are in your own circles. Because number one, just from a business standpoint, from a being professionalism standpoint, if you ruin your relationship with everybody else, like you're only shooting yourself in the foot. So these are all, again, you might think, well, how does this apply to me? Well, I'm just telling you what you're going to experience. You're going to experience the people coming after you and trying to get you dragged into drama. Most of the time it's better to ignore that stuff. And even I get dragged into that stuff. I'm just giving tips and pointers on like what you will experience if you try to pursue your goals. It doesn't have to be podcasting. It might be music. Maybe you're pursuing your passion for music, and you have a big falling out with the band that you're opening for, or you're an opener for some big headliner. You have a big falling out, and so you can't let those kinds of things destroy the path the journey that you're on. And yeah, like deciding things like, oh, I just want to be famous or something, that's not a legitimate goal. When I started doing this, I had absolutely no desire or thought that this would be where it is. So for me, it's kind of unexpected. It's weird. It's a challenge at times, but you adapt to the situation, and you adapt to the new challenges as they come. There's a new, every time you sort of get to bigger tiers of the audience, there's new challenges in the sense of like opposition. So you get more levels of opposition. I thought it was going to be in the world, for example, in 2018, when my website got deleted. I thought that was it. Right. But no, it actually ended up being a good thing, because that allowed me to adapt by building my own website and having it run by me. So I don't rely on the woke people at, WordPress to have my income. So the more, as the challenges come and the better that you adapt to them, it actually makes you stronger in the long run. Again, I know that's like a Nietzschean cliche, but yeah, the challenges do make you stronger.
Yeah. And I think that, the ability to take those situations and stretch them out over time so that you can examine them and thoughtfully respond to situations is a key to like getting along with people in a social sense. Because if you're out there saying, well, I'm entitled to this, and this other person crossed some threshold and they must therefore be, it's like, there's no evidence to that. You're not doing service to your audience. You're just gaslighting them. You're not actually growing up to the other person's level. So you're not ever going to get the benefits that you're expecting from those actions. So it's just kind of sad when people do that. And I think it's unnecessary. So once we learn to don't listen to professional critics, dismiss the arbitrary noise, don't feed the trolls, then you can move forward and you can be productive and focused, because success is saying yes to one thing and saying no to 1,000 distractions. So you can actually get something done. You want to take a couple questions from the audience?
Sure.
Mission Control, who's got their hand up?
Hi there. Alrighty. Tony, please unmute yourself.
Hey, Jay.
Hey.
You mentioned about controlled opposition within, I guess, I'm assuming, the freedom movement. We also talked about earlier on this call about verifying and trust. And in some cases, it's hard to do when the host doesn't challenge the interviewee and tries to in order to keep the conversation going. I guess in one of your book reviews, you covered one of John Coleman's books. Mm-hmm. And just wondering, do you consider him as a psyop due to, I guess, in some cases, what was written in Dope.Inc?
Do you mean, do I think that Dr. Coleman ripped off Dope Inc?
That too. Like, for those that aren't familiar with the nuance 10 years ago, there's stuff floating around in forums and stuff that you wouldn't know if you had just read it recently. Are you familiar with that nuance?
I am. I've posted the video of there was a gentleman in a chair who gave a very good critique of Coleman's work probably about 12 years ago. It's posted. It's still in the Tragedy and Hope online community. So the video is findable. And it's good to read the book and hear the critique so you can actually weigh the information. So the way I would judge it is I would dismiss the messenger of Coleman and I would focus on the message, and where the message that Coleman gives us, whether it's Council of 300 or Tavistock, matches up to evidence and reality, I'm going to keep those points and I'm going to use them. And the places where he might have hyperbole or a bad source or misinformation or downright disinformation, I'm going to sift that with my critical thinking. I'm going to dismiss that as arbitrary. I'm not going to think about it again. So I understand the nature of your question, and that's kind of how I deal with that situation. Jay, did you have any?
Yeah, I would say that I'm not familiar with the specific critique that you're talking about, but I'm happy to say that there's flaws in the Committee of 300. For example, I think that I've never seen the claim justified that Adorno and those people wrote the Beatles songs. So I think that was exaggeration or overstatement. I don't doubt that I've read papers about that Adorno wrote about different types of intonation that could be used for different purposes in terms of social engineering, that doesn't necessarily mean that he wrote or they wrote the Beatles song. So, there's examples like that where Coleman was wrong. I mean, in some of his predictions about what would happen in, by 2020, 2030, there's things that I think were wrong. But I, as far as I could tell, the information that's in, for example, Tavistock book or his book, World Socialism, there's quite a bit about the Fabians in there that was good and solid. But could he have been a disinformation plan? I suppose that's possible. But like Richard said, I would just go with the information that is verifiable. I mean, I feel the same way. Like I think Fritz Springmeier has a lot of goofy stuff in it, but he also in many ways was kind of ahead of the game in other areas. So, I think that in the 90s, we should extend some grace to some of those people, because it was a lot more difficult to research and verify things in the 90s before the internet, than later. I know that I forget exact publication date of Committee of 300, but Fritz's stuff is like in the 90s, right? So I think
it's like
I don't recommend
Tex Mars, for instance. You have to be able to read these books, consider a lot of these things, and throw most of it away because it doesn't match up to reality. But every now and then you get a nugget, which is kind of why you'd explore those fringy type of books.
Yeah, let me give you an example.
Cooper.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
So so Fritz wrote a goofy book about the one with Cisco Wheeler about reintegrating program to multiple alter people. Okay, so I think a lot of that book is silly. It's over the top. It's ridiculous. However, there was a chapter that was really good where he recommended programming and metaprogramming in the human biocomputer by Lilly. And that book is phenomenal in terms of what it admits. It's crazy. And I'd never heard of that book, but I came across it, by Fritz mentioning it. And yeah, I suppose it's possible I could have come across in other ways. But so, I think the way I see these things is my first tier of most important information is global elites in their own books. Second tier, I consider things like this might have been a global elite text, or it might not have been, like the Silent Weapons or Quiet Wars text, which I don't know that we can verify that, but it does claim to be an elite text, right? And I would throw like books that predicted or warned about the New World Order into the third tier of books. That would be books like Coleman. That would be books like, I don't know, something by other theorist type people in the 80s and 90s, right? So they're not the most solid texts, but they're worth analyzing and looking at to see if they had good ideas, good references, got some things right. And I think Coleman's in that. So in other words, I don't hinge a lot of my argumentation on Coleman. I've just covered him recently because there were several sections for example, I think he was right about the stuff related to Gladio. And he was talking about Gladio at a time when basically nobody knew about Gladio. It was brand new on the scene. David Yallop's book was late 80s. We only know what Gladio is in the early 90s. So there's areas where I think he was kind of ahead of the time. So anyway, I'm being maybe overly verbose, but just
no, I appreciate the epistemological thought. And thanks, Richard. Do you have the link for that forum?
I can find it, after this event, and I can.
So what's the basic idea? Just that.
Oh, he's a former British military officer who took what was being said seriously, but found a number of interesting inconsistencies in what Coleman was putting forth. So, I just took it with a grain of salt. I heard both sides, and I was
I'm not wedded to John Coleman. I have no problem.
Yeah, I was never using Coleman as a primary reference. Yeah. Right. And that's the whole thing is, like for instance, lastly on this topic, there's the book by Anthony Sutton, and in there he cites a Rothschild brothers letter, and the book that he cited was called Lightning Over the Treasury. So I wanted to find the result of where did he find this? And I bought the book Lightning Over the Treasury, and I see what their claim was. And I was like, this seems specious. I don't believe the evidence. These guys, they didn't have very good verification back then, maybe. Right. And I set it aside thinking I can't use that in a presentation because I don't see the evidence for it because of how the letter was formatted and the wording of it. But then I came to find later in the Rothschild archives. That is a real letter, and that's the way it was. So it's okay to like hold, like, we have no obligation to say this is what it is right now. We can hold our response and our decision until a time when it's like we have enough information and it's appropriate time to make a decision. Otherwise, we can continue taking in new information on these topics.
Yeah, on that very point, I had a liberal in a debate with me, actually, on that very footnote and what you're talking about, Rachel. The guy said, "Oh, that's not a valid book because it was written by some Confederate or something like that, or some person that had pro-Confederate ideas." So in other words, well, first of all, that's a fallacy. Like, just because the author of the book had ideas that you don't like, that wouldn't mean that the book is false. But secondly, I said to the guy who was attempting to then debunk the entire Sutton book that even if he has a footnote bad, like, literally, you're never going to find anybody's academic work that's multiple hundred pages with hundreds of footnotes. Somebody's going to have a mistake, or somebody's going to have a footnote that doesn't discount the entire book, right? Unless the footnote said something like, this entire book is based on this footnote and this reference. And then if the reference was bullshit, maybe in that case. But I mean, it's just kind of like unrealistic standards, and kind of, I don't know, to me, it's being a little overly perfectionist or high. I mean, look, I've done academic type stuff long enough to realize if you spend enough time in not just historical academic literature, but in philosophical literature or whatever, like, you're going to find that people make mistakes, or they have, references that aren't always perfect. And as we go back in time, when you get back into like the early 1900s and late 1800s, whatever, like, it wasn't normative then to even cite sources. The expectation was that if you were a scholar or an academic, that you were honest, and that if you had a degree, or if the expectation was that you were going to be knowing what you were talking about. Nowadays, it's a lot more precise, and we have a lot more expectations about sources and documentation and all that. So it's just, we can't apply all of the perfect analytical standards that we might have of 2024 to how people even in the 1960s and 70s wrote.
Yeah, it's disingenuous to apply utopian standards to the environment in which we're all trying to create content. Because the other side, like the Neil Fergusons of the world, the Rothschild archives puts everything on a silver platter, and he can write a 2-volume set, and it gets advertising and marketing and is like famous all over the world. And on the other side, there's Carol Quigley and Anthony Sutton. In a best case scenario, serious academics from Stanford Institute for Peace, the Hoover Institute, and Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. So it's not like a Chris Milligan Trine Day author. These are serious accredited authors who got taken to the bank. Like, Quigley got lied to. It was a legit conspiracy. You can hear him talk about it. You can hear his wife talk about it. They straight up tried to deep six his book. Sutton was fired by the same guy who later fires Steve Jobs, David Packard, from the Trilateral Commission, because he started looking into the Trilateral Commission while he was at the Hoover Institute, and they said you're persona non grata, and tried to ruin his career. So when they leave credible things behind and they're not perfect, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater unless you know how to comprehend what you are literate in and understand what they're saying first. Then you can say, I could throw away this footnote, he got it wrong. But you can't take away all the other credible work that are thousands of pages deep and unassailable, and so good that they're referred to by Zbigniew Brzezinski in Between Two Ages.
I even said that to the liberal. I said that to that guy, that leftist guy that was arguing with me. He said, well, this book's no good because Sutton cites a dubious source. And I said, well, then your own hero Brzezinski is no good because he cites Sutton. So
yeah, and if that's the rule, it has to apply to both sides. So if there's one dubious source, you throw out the entire source. Okay, if that's not going to be how it is, fair, like, because people don't have a sense of fair debate or play. Like, there's no enriching the audience through the interactions of the two people conflicting oftentimes, right? You have to be able to like do something that educates them, and they know more about either one position, and maybe sometimes they change their position if you're debating properly and giving good information out there. And I think that's all just lost on the public. And part of it is because people were taught to be literate, but not how to comprehend or to have any active literacies to express it.
Also, I think as you get older, you kind of understand, human flaws and fallibility, and I look back, I mean, I see some of the footnotes and the way that I wrote in the first Esoteric Hollywood book. I think some of that's pretty weak. I could have done way better in certain, I mean, not overall. I think the book's overall pretty good still, but some of the footnotes that I used weren't the best. Some of the way the writing style wasn't that great. It was my first book. It was my first outing. So, that's just, we can't have unrealistic expectations in this kind of research. And another example would be, and maybe you guys are super adept researchers beyond a lot of what I know. So I'm happy to learn. I'm always learning from you guys. So, like the Red Symphony text from Rakovsky, I mean, that can't be fully verified because it pops up at an unknown time out of Soviet Russia. And I have actual NKVD archived interviews with Rakovsky from the time. And the interrogation that I have, it's not the interrogation called Red Symphony. The Red Symphony, if it's true, is a really important piece of data that backs up Quigley. It backs up a lot of these other texts getting into verifying the role of Sidney Riley, being an agent of the Rothschilds. All of this is really treated in detail in the Rakovsky interrogation. So how do we actually know whether this is a Stalinist disinformation thing or whether it was a legitimate interrogation that got out? I don't know that we can at this point verify it. We know that Rakovsky was interrogated by the NKVD because we have other interrogations in the official KGB interrogations. But it looks like, from my opinion, this is just giving my opinion, like what all is in there is lines up with so much of what we read in other really hard to find and piece together information about Warburg's letters about the Rothschilds and the Bolshevik Revolution, the history of Sidney Riley and his role as an agent. I mean, the role of using Freemasonry, all these different secret societies from an intelligence perspective. I mean, it's so profound in terms of how it's pretty much the way we understand the conspiracy at that time. So, but does that mean that it's true? No, right? It still might be an invalid, made up manuscript, but that's why it's in that category of, it's the same as the day tapes, right? Like the lectures, the day tape lectures, I don't have access to the actual lectures that Day was at, right? Or that Day was giving from the guy.
It was like 1967.
Yeah. So do I know with 100% certitude that that's what went down? Well, I only have the recounting of the one guy who was pro-life at the thing, and everything that he says lines up with what has rolled out. So I think that's highly probable. I would say the Rakovsky interrogation, highly probable, but I can't 100% verify that.
All right. One more quick question from the audience, and then we gotta keep moving.
Yeah. If somebody's asking for the book, if you just look up Red Symphony, you'll find that it's pretty easy. It's everywhere online. But
and then you can match that up with the Venona transcripts. I have several books on those. Those are signals intelligence gathered in the 1950s on communist elements in the United States that were then later decoded in the early 1990s to show that even though McCarthy's an asshole, there was a lot of that going on.
Yes.
So, yeah. It actually happened. Venona is the name of that.
Hey, so I wasn't prompted to speak, but I'm going to go ahead and ask you, this is sort of backpedaling to what you guys were talking about before. I know you are going to research and literature type of question to a more interpersonal and professional growth type of question. And what I've been kind of dealing with is if people you share your work with, and I'm not talking about trolls or people who, hate on you on the internet, but people that you care about or even mentors that you've acquired rarely give you critical feedback. How do you open a dialogue that invites the hard criticism that it takes to level up? And there's a second part to that question. I know you wanted me to keep it short, but at what point do you stop giving a shit even about what they have to say?
To regularly ask, how do you think I can improve, from someone whose opinion you respect and has been there and done that and has the experience, that's usually a good opportunity. Otherwise, instead of telling me how to improve, a lot of people should learn how to go do likewise. right? I got my start because I kept sitting there waiting for Alex Jones to open a package and explain this information to the public about all these corporate, insider trading going on in 9/11, these sort of things. I was expecting somebody else to do this thing. I was like, he's not doing a good enough job. He doesn't give enough references. He doesn't do this. He doesn't cite the papers. We've got the documents. He should put the documents out. And at one point I discovered, oh, that's my responsibility. I should do these things. So I was one of the first podcasters to put every link to every piece of evidence that I talked about at any given time. I built a history blueprint and put 10,000 of those links and pieces of evidence with 5 references each. So that's 50,000 references. So I didn't have to keep recreating the wheel every time someone said, where's the document? What is 1035-960 concerning criticism of the Warren Commission report? And how does that translate into people using the pejorative term conspiracy theory today? What do you got, Jay?
That's a tough question. It's not easy. There's not going to be an easy answer to know when to not listen to a mentor. I mean, I would say that when you, maybe if you get to the point where you're at the level of a mentor, right? Like, I don't know, like the confrontation between Obi-Wan and Vader or something. Now I am the master. I mean, maybe when you get to that point, you can dismiss your mentor's advice, but I would say just always be willing to hear from people who have achieved more than you, how you can do better. Yeah, that's a really tough one. I don't know what the easy answer to that is. I mean, I would just say, just never be averse to hearing how you can do it better. I mean, I think most of us who are like the way I hear you speaking, you're probably your own most severe critic. I'm pretty severe critic of my own stuff as well. I think I try to be. So even maybe more than mentors, we probably typically have to worry more about our own self-criticism, which again, how to balance that out. I think that the more you do what you do, the more you will see the results. You'll see what's successful, what's not, what works, what doesn't work. And you'll be a better critic of yourself, and more fair to yourself when you do have some successes, when you do see what works.
All right. Good mini workout there. We're about 30 minutes. We're 30 minutes behind schedule. So we're going to go to a quick break. I want you to visit Jay's analysis for his entire archive. And you can also get his philosophy course on here. If you scroll around right here, you can learn about philosophy. You can see his latest videos and you can see some of his comedy. What's the best place that people want to see funny stuff where you do impressions and stuff? Is that on here somewhere?
Well, what I've done now is pretty much every live stream, I kind of integrate the wildness. So we do a lot of commentaries on, videos, TikTok. We riff on a lot of stuff, ridiculous TikToks and this kind of stuff. So usually every new live stream has quite a bit of that. There is a playlist on my YouTube channel, which is all just the comedic stuff. There's a tab there on the website that's the comedic stuff. And like I said, we'll be live in LA March 15th with Jamie Kennedy. So there'll be a lot of, I mean, I'm a shamelessly pro infotainment person. I've always thought that critiquing infotainment is kind of missing the point. I mean, infotainment is the system uses entertainment to indoctrinate people. I think we should be better at that. We should utilize, entertainment to make and that's one of the reasons Alex is so popular is that he's entertaining. And that's a positive thing. It's not a negative thing. So we need to be able to utilize all the skills that we have, including, being ridiculous at times.
Yeah. If you don't have a sense of humor, you're not going to make it long-term exposure to truthful information and you're going to have a fragile mentality. So learn how to be anti-fragile. Keep hanging out. Jay, thank you for coming today. We're going to go to a quick break and we're going to bring on the next speaker, Courtney Turner, and we're going to learn how she throws a gig because she threw a big live in public gig. And I wanted to help you understand how you can do likewise. All right, Jay, see you soon. Peace.
Prior to enrolling in AUTONOMY, what were the biggest obstacles blocking your growth? myself.
It was fear, overwhelm, and disorganization.
I think we can summarize it with doubting myself.
Health and the impact that that's had on day-to-day life.
Definitely a lack of motivation and excuses.
I was intimidated by it.
Probably just experimenting and trying ideas.
I had a comfortable job.
Not knowing my next steps.
Lack of time.
And that was for a lot of reasons.
With doubting that I could make use or make value of what it is that Richard is teaching.
Lingering issues with self-confidence.
What would an example of that be? A lack of motivation or an excuse that you would conveniently bring in?
Common one would be, oh, I don't have time for that.
Had financial constraints.
Theorizing a little bit too much.
I was just pretty much in the comfort zone.
I also had some problems with anxiety.
I think trying to break away from a scarcity mindset or a mindset that success isn't for me was a challenge.
I'm not quite sure how I would utilize these skills.
3 young children, so it's really easy to use a chaotic life of a busy mom to not make the time to do things. But it's possible. It's possible.
As far as the obstacles blocking your growth.
That was financial constraints at the time, at that point. And in my life, blocking my growth is that I was traveling around a lot. So I was trying to sort out what I was going to do with my future and my sons.
I think I also lack the lack of community.
The thing that you may not know is that autonomy is a community, and it's so much more than just teachings from Richard. It's the support and the learning and the growth from interacting with other wonderful, excellent, creative, kind, and beautiful people.
Anytime I'd have time, I would get kind of sucked into that time in other ways that wasn't necessarily time for me. So
Curious, what do you do now?
Now I really take the time to invest in myself more so. And I think that's, autonomy. There's me investing in myself. It's huge.
Yeah. Excellent.
Having seen Cody and the growth that Cody, my son, has had in the autonomy community and experience, it was definitely time. It was definitely time to get in and reap the benefits for myself.
First 3 lectures or so were life-changing because I felt like I was in a supportive environment where I could just discuss what's going on and what actions I needed to take.
Being live, and the interacting. So the question and answer Sunday or or even the Friday after the lecture. The whole thing. And then getting access to Grand Theft World, that is huge. That is really big. I was so excited when I heard that.
So the Q&A, I guess, that's something that was really powerful for me. And the other thing that I remember clearly that even kind of changed the way I was taking the course is the fact that I don't need to be an expert at something to do it professionally. So I don't need to spend 10,000 hours with something to offer as a service. I just gotta actually get some time in, 20 hours of exposure, and then keep learning. I don't need to be perfect at what I offer. People are not really seeking that as much as I used to think, Getting over schooling, I didn't really expect the insights I got because they were very subtle. It wasn't black and white. It was it's very odd how it unfolded in my mind. After seeing the ultimate history lesson interviews, gaining back some mental autonomy was a beautiful experience that I wasn't expecting, and I don't think it was advertised or not the way I thought it would be.